Hey everyone, welcome back to Reading with Tatiana. Today I'm reviewing a physical copy of a book, Bright Young Women by Jessica Knoll, and I gave this book a 4 out of 5. Before I go into my full book review, my booktube shout today goes out to Tina's Book and Craft Corner. She's been on the booktube community for about 4 months. She does weekly vlogs, she participates in readathon, so link her channel down below and show her some support. And as always, if you're watching this, I always will appreciate if you hit the subscribe button, give this video a thumbs up, and comment down below if you have read Bright Young Women by Jessica Knoll or any of her other works. This book was published very recently, just this past September in 2023, and the genre I would categorize it as is thriller slash historical fiction in more recent terms, which is like the mid to late 70s. A bit about the author Jessica Knoll. So she grew up in Philadelphia. She's an American author, and now she lives in LA with her husband and Bodog Franklin. She is a New York Times bestselling author of The Favorite Sister and Luckiest Girl Alive. I haven't read Luckiest Girl Alive, but I had watched the Netflix movie and adaptation of it that stars Mila Kunis. And man, I went into that movie blind because I'm like, oh, Mila Kunis, I like her as an actress. So I watched it, and it was quite a heavy movie, very similar to this book, which I went into blind as well, as it was a book club read. And man, like, Jessica Knoll, you just know how to cover tough but important topics for women. And she is a great writer, and she has also been a senior editor at the women's magazine Cosmopolitan, and also an editor at Self, which is also a women's magazine. And she has also dabbled in being a screenwriter for some TV shows. Let's get into the premise of the book. So we start the story with Pamela back then in the mid to late 70s. And basically Pamela is the president of her sorority, and then one night she wakes up and she's like an intruder in the house. At first she thought maybe it was like one of her sorority sister's boyfriend, but when she looked again, it was actually someone she didn't know. And then she went to investigate to see if anything was happening, and a few of her sisters were assaulted. 2 of them were actually killed. So this happens very quickly right at the beginning, and then basically we follow the story of Pamela, who has witnessed these assaults and killings of her sorority sisters. And she goes to the police station and that kind of stuff. And then shortly she meets Martina, or Tina, and Martina and Tina suspects that the person who killed the sorority girls and assaulted the sorority girls is also the same person who killed her friend Ruth in a different state a few years ago. And then so Pamela and Tina become like this pairing where they try to figure out if this killer is the same person. And then a other timeline is in the future, which is also Pamela, when she kind of is given this like card or letter, and she kind of reflects back on the events that happened in the 70s when there was that sorority spree killing. And there's another timeline character of Ruth, who is Martina slash Tina's friend, and talks about her story and about her experience as a woman of the time. And I don't want to get into any like spoilers because basically it's a thriller, so I don't want to ruin anything. But basically this book is the premise of following the victims of a serial killer, and also the people adjacent to the victims, so like the friends, the family. And it's just a very interesting perspective because you very normally hear about the serial killer and how they're kind of like glorified and the face in mainstream media, but you very rarely hear not only just the victim side of the story, but you almost never hear about the people who have survived. What's the word they say with pictures? Who have like the victims' families and friends who have like outlived or still alive and experiencing the death of someone close to them. So it's a very interesting premise, and the characters, you kind of see that they cross paths, and you're kind of wondering how they know each other, or you kind of know in the future they know each other and how that happens. It's a very interesting read. Common themes I found in this book is number 1 is the power of women. This book was set in the 70s for in the past timeline, and honestly it freaking blows my mind how the 70s was just 50 years ago and things were just so like shitty for women. Like, I think in the 70s women already had the right to vote and stuff, but man, like, just like these like not even like microaggressions, but like just passive aggressive aggressions towards women. Like, Pamela, when she was a sorority girl in college, she had a boyfriend that, they were a great relationship and everything. But just things he would do that maybe at the time was totally normalized, but me as a woman reading in 2023, I'm like, damn, that's like so like he treats her as like a child, and it's not on the same playing level. So just seeing the power of women when they come together and support each other, and also how hard it was to be a woman back then in like a man's world. And then also a other common theme in the book, which I kind of touched on earlier with the premise, is that when it comes to serial killers, we always hear about the face of the person killing all these people. And there's documentaries, there's a Netflix series about all these serial killers, and the victims are kind of just like a footnote, or just like, oh, these are all their victims. And this book really talks about how we glorify and sensationalize the killer, but we kind of forget about the victims, and more importantly, forget about the people who are still living and have to deal with the impact of their friend or family member dying. So these stories of people adjacent to the victims. I gave this book a 4 out of 5, so there's something I didn't like. So this is a in-person book club I was doing in Calgary, and all my friends in this book club gave us a 5 out of 5. I was the anomaly, and I think for me, like, the writing style was really hard to get into. Also, the dual timeline was hard to get into because the dual timeline was kind of complicated, because there's Pamela from the 70s, but there's also Pamela in present day, and there's Ruth back then. So when you had Pamela in the past and present, I found it kind of like choppy, or I have to kind of like take a step back and be like, okay, which timeline and which Pamela am I getting? So I didn't really like that style. This is kind of similar to the other book I reviewed, I think back in October, Wrong Place, Wrong Time or something, where it's also like dual timeline and also a crime thriller. And I think specifically crime thriller is just not my cup of tea. I don't know why I don't like it, I just don't. Things I did like about this book, which I think is more like the importance of this book, is the commentary of what's like to be a woman back then, of what's like to be a woman even nowadays. I really enjoyed all the secondary characters. I felt so many secondary characters were fully developed. I felt some secondary characters were like a really good bait and switch. Carl, with no spoilers. And I also really like the highlight of Ruth's story and her relationship with her parents and her father. Again, I don't want to spoil, but I just really love that it wasn't just a main character story, it was all these character stories, and I never felt like there wasn't a room or it was rushed. And I felt Jessica Ngo, the author, did a really good job building all these characters. On Goodreads, this book got an average of 4.05 out of 5. This book literally just came out like 2-3 months ago, so take this rating with a grain of salt. Bad reviews where people thought the pacing was a bit slow. They thought it could trim about 100 200 pages, which is like a crazy review to me, because the copy I got, this like real physical copy, is, I don't know, like 376 pages. So if you trim 100 or even 200 pages, I honestly don't agree with that review, because you would miss so much. And like I said, the reason I like this book is because all the secondary character developments. So I think that person that wrote the review I can't disagree with. I do agree with the pacing could have been better, and I also do agree with the reviews saying that the dual timeline was a bit confusing. Good reviews where people said this book is really good at taking the power away from the man and brings it back to young women who are victims and survivors. And I really do feel strongly about this book, that this book is by a woman for the women, and is great for women to read. I'm actually very curious for a man to read this book, hetero or not hetero, and just seeing how they would take this book, because this book just makes me reflect more about my safety when I walk around, and how we're really not safe. Obviously like crime can happen to a man or woman, but I think as a woman you're just more of a target. So I think this book really highlights that, and how women, we have to support each other, yeah. Why I think you should read this book: I think you should read it. As I mentioned before, the premise is very unique. Instead of like talking about the serial killer and what he is and who he is, it talks about the victims and people adjacent to the victims. I really enjoyed the book too, because without spoiling, this book is inspired by a true serial killer, but the author chooses to never say his name, which I really like, because it takes away the power that he has, so I really enjoyed that. Now I'll share how this book made me feel, because if you asked me a week, a year, 5 years from now, I probably won't remember exactly what the book was about, but I'll remember how it made me feel. So this book, it made me feel like I should always check behind my shoulders. Like, it's honestly not safe being a woman, especially me, I'm a petite woman, and You know, when I walk around at night, I don't have my headphones in. When I go running, I always check behind my shoulders. And I may be a bit paranoid, but it just makes me this book just reminds me you're never quite safe. But obviously don't live in fear, just live smart. Thank you for watching Tell Me My Book Review for Bright Young Women by Jessica Ngo. If you read this book, I would love to hear what you thought down below. And if you have read any of her other works and recommend them, please say so down below as well. I'll see you guys next time. Bye.